It is now my pleasure to introduce today's day chair, Bob Rosner. As you know, Bob is a shy little flower. With practically, with practically no notice, Bob is the guy who gets the call from King 5, The Today Show, CBS This Morning, to speak on business topics he's likely never addressed before. What you might not know about Bob is that he is a collective catharsis guru. In the fall, he launches Work Improv Happy Hour at the Act Theater with former Seattle 4 Rotarian B. Swanson, and my favorite part, an accordion player. Bob has been on our Rotary board, our program chair twice, and a 4-time Paul Harris Fellow. What I love most about Bob is how fun it is to pester him and how creative and passionate he is about making things ever better. Welcome, Bob.
Many of you know Robert Spector as the author of The Nordstrom Way, a bestseller. But he's also written a variety of other books, family business, and a bunch of corporate histories. He's also a speaker who speaks worldwide. Robert has built a career on telling corporations how they can do a better job. Today, he takes a vacation from all of that and wants to talk to you about business failure. So I've encouraged Bob to really have fun and give us some insight about what not to do in the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Spector.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I actually was here before, and I'm not going to be talking about the same thing, so you don't have to leave early. But before I get into failure, I was just talking to my friend Laurel James from Super Jock and Jill, and she told me that this year Super Jock and Jill will celebrate 40 years of business. So I think we should give them a round of applause. All right. Now, that ain't easy, for those of you who know anything about retail. So when Bob Rosner, my old friend, asked me to say, I'd like you to come to Rotary and speak about failure, I was wondering, is he telling me something here? And then I thought about it, and now, Bob and I have lived in this area for a long time, but both of us are from New Jersey, so therefore we are intimate with failure. And, this is about do's and don'ts, so in New Jersey we also know about D's, Dems, and Do's. So, I'm interested, I don't want to talk about failure, somebody who tried a business and nothing came of it. Now, I think it's more interesting to talk about businesses that were successful and then ultimately failed. So I teach a class on retail leadership at the UW Bothell. And I'm fascinated with failure. I've certainly experienced a lot of it firsthand. So I've asked my students to pick a retailer that was once dominant and that eventually failed, and tell me why they succeeded and why they failed. Now, the retail graveyard is filled with once famous companies. I'll just rattle off a few. Woolworth, Montgomery Ward, Rexall Drugs, and Tom McCann Shoes, and Blockbuster Video, and Circuit City, and Borders Books. And AMP, that AMP was the Google and the Walmart of its day. They once had 14,000 stores. They had their own radio station. They started Women's Day magazine. And now, what are they're just about to go, they're in chapter 11. There will be no more AMP stores. That's just one example. Just because you're on top doesn't mean you're going to stay there. And of course, here in Seattle, we've got well-known names like Frederick and Nelson, and Jay Jacobs, and Ernst, and Pay and Save, and all that. I see a lot of people nodding. And some stores are meant to last or businesses a certain period of time. Others continue. So I've come to the conclusion that in the end, it's all about values. And as you heard, I've written a few books on Nordstrom. I've written about other companies like Amazon. And so I'm doing a series of books now just built on values. Because you can't get somebody you hire them, and then you have to buy into our values. They have to have your values coming in. So I'm talking about simple stuff we all know: respect, trust, innovation and adaptation, awareness, communication and collaboration, competition and compensation, selfless service, loyalty, and fun, because you don't want to forget fun in the equation. And so I think that if the companies that have failed, I'm just going to limit it to two topics in the time I have. One is failure to take care of employees, and the other is failing to change. So, it was a perfect example of Circuit City. Now, a few years ago, I did a book on big box stores called Category Killers, and Circuit City was right there with Best Buy and all these dominant retailers. And then the market changes and competition changes. And so what did Circuit City do? They took knowledgeable, experienced employees who were on commission, and they said to them, "You're no longer on commission, you are now on an hourly wage, but we have a great new title for you, product specialist." Wow, I'm a product specialist, but I'm making $7 an hour, And so when I read that they were doing that, I said, this company is dead. They don't know it yet, but they're dead. You can't do that to your employees. You can't demotivate them and then say, even though we're not paying you, just go out there and take one for the team. So, and I looked at the Circuit City story on Wikipedia, and it ends with the Washington Post talking about their layoffs and cutting pay, and the consequent loss of experienced staff. It appeared to be, quote unquote, backfiring. So now Circuit City is gone. So part of that, the rest of it is not adapting to change in the marketplace. All the companies, whether it's Canlis or it's Super Jock and Jill or anything, you have to figure out what is our value and how can we exist when the markets change. Looking at a Frederick and Nelson, for those of you who have been around here for a long time, those of you who haven't, where Nordstrom is now, there used to be a store called Frederick and Nelson, and that was the quintessential Seattle store. And it went through different ownership. It went through very timid ownership. It was owned by Marshall Field for many years, and for those of you who are from Chicago, Frango started a Frederick and Nelson in Seattle and not in Chicago. And the perfect example was when Northgate and South Center were developed by a company called Allied, which also owned the Bon Marché. So when Frederick and Nelson had the opportunity to be in Northgate and South Center, their management in Chicago said, "We don't want to be in a project that's developed by our competition." So that's why they were not in those shopping centers. And it's a matter of, they're kind of out there in Seattle, so we're really not going to pay attention. They have a good market, and of course, they are history. And by the way, the reason that Frederick and Nelson is where it is D.E. Frederick, the founder, knew that eventually the heart of downtown was going to be on Pine Street, which is the only street that goes from Capitol Hill to the waterfront. That's why Frederick and Nelson is there. A little bit of Seattle trivia I thought I would throw in there. But I'm also interested in hearing, from the gentleman at Canlis, because I just talked about change. And, you ever watch the Travel Channel, and they show these great restaurants that have been around forever. And you talk to the clientele, and they say, "We don't want them to change a thing. I brought my grandparents and my parents brought me here, and now I'm bringing my children and grandchildren here, and we want the menu to stay the same. We want the plates to stay the same. We want everything to stay the same." And there are some that work, that are institutions, and I don't know what it is, but people just want that to happen. So But for the most part, it is all about change. And I was just in Indiana. I found myself driving from Bloomington to Indianapolis, and I saw a highway named after John Wooden, the legendary coach of UCLA basketball. And he said, failure isn't fatal, but failure to change might be. And I want to finish up with one quick story about a Seattle company that experienced failure. I used to cover not only retail, but the apparel business. And there used to be a very successful apparel company here called Genera. How many people remember Genera? Okay, yeah, quite a few. They were a top young men's apparel business, and then they found this fad item called Hypercolor. And Hypercolor was a t-shirts and sweatshirts that was heat sensitive. You put your hand on it, you got your fingerprint. Anybody remember Hypercolor? Okay. So there was a 3-month period in 1991 where Genera sold $50 million worth of Hypercolor shirts. And I was in the office of the then head of marketing and sales, and this was back in the days of fax machines. And it was like somebody decided Tuesday at 3 o'clock, this fad is over. And he was getting all these order cancellations, coming in, and finally, Genera went out of business. The tail had wagged the dog. But there's a happy ending. One of the guys from Genera, that gentleman whose office I was in, and another guy from Union Bay, decided to start 3 companies in the apparel business. One was called Linguini and Bob. One was called Jawbone. And then they had this other one called Tommy Bahama. So they decided to go with Tommy Bahama, and they eventually sold that company to Oxford Industries for $400 million. So on that positive note, I want to thank you all very much for the do's and the don'ts.